Well, hello everyone. I am super excited about this morning and this interview that I'm having with Bill Markham. Bill Markham is the lead pastor at St. Catherine's Church, Central, I believe, right?
Church, yep.
And so it's not just that he's a lead pastor at a church in Ontario. To me, Bill Markham has been an incredible mentor of my life. In fact, he was my youth pastor, and I felt very privileged and honored to be under his ministry. And Bill, I don't know if I've told you this, but when I talk about transformation in my life, I talk about Jesus first and Bill Markham second. And I want to thank you so much for investing into me. I want to tell you a couple things. You showed me the love of God in your life. You loved me and us, all of us at the church and at the youth group, so much that it was evident. And that was life-changing to me. I loved how you preached the word. I loved your passion for Jesus. You were one of the first cool people I ever met who loved Jesus. And thank you so much for your investment into me. And your prayers and your ministry has not gone unnoticed. So I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank you for being you. And I'm excited for our church to hear your passion for Jesus and for the mission of Christ. And so thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, thank you. I mean, that was, yeah, thank you. I just need you to know too, that I am super proud of you. And I did know you when you were just a punk teenager, and I saw what God did in your life and what he has done in your life. And super excited. I just want your congregation to know how fortunate they are to have you as their leader too, because the truth is we need leaders in these times that are willing to take risks, are courageous, but love Jesus and are rooted and anchored. And that describes you, my friend. And so, yeah, I am so glad just to be here with all of you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I think that's what we're here to talk about is like transformation, because God has transformed our lives, and we want other people to know the love and the grace of God, the forgiveness, the acceptance, all the wonderful things that God has, the blessings, all of it. And so that's what our hearts are, that others, in not only in our church, but in our community would feel that. So I want to ask you though, Bill, and I know this is a very large question, but what are you passionate about?
Mm-hmm.
What gets you up in the morning? What drives you to do what you do?
Mm-hmm. Well, the truth is, I think that I don't even like to use the word crisis, but this situation that we're facing in our world has actually given us a gift. And the gift is twofold. The gift is to really evaluate what really is important. We've heard the word essential a lot, like essential services and essential workers. And I guess for me, it's been what is really essential in my life. When you strip away everything else, I honestly believe that it's only the love of God that is going to change the world. I believe that with every fiber in my being, not only because I've personally experienced it, but because I've seen it transform so many people. And in a world filled of hatred and division and chaos, I believe that God's order and his love is the only hope. And so because I deeply love people, not only because I philosophically and ideologically believe that they're created in the image of God, and so they have incredible dignity and value, even if they completely disagree with me, but also because I just have a passion to see people experience the very best life God created for them. And so that's the one gift. And on the other hand, it's also been the gift of that we get to change some things, that has actually exposed some, if I'm totally transparent, some of the things that I see even in us as followers of Jesus that maybe needed to be addressed and dealt with. And so for me, what gets me up every day, what motivates me is helping people understand and experience the love of God for themselves, because I believe that's the only thing that will change the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. So you and I had a conversation, and back in the day, if I had asked you maybe 2 years ago, who's your target audience, you would say what, and then what do you say now?
Yeah, well, I think my target audience has always been the target audience of Jesus. Jesus came to seek and save the lost. I think that can never, ever we can never lose focus on that. As soon as the church loses its focus on that, it loses its purpose. For this is what Jesus called us to. He said to go into all the world and make disciples. And of course, that means that you got to start with people who are not disciples. And so I think that should never change. As soon as you lose your passion for reaching people, you're just a social club. You become an inclusive, ingrown, tribal, divisive entity in the world. And we have enough identity politics. We don't need more. And so unfortunately for a lot of Christians, they've become identified with a certain strand of politics, what they're against, not what they're for. And so we need to change that narrative. We need to be for people because God is for people. But I think what you're getting at is how you do that. What's the best approach to that? And so for the longest time at Central, we really designed our weekend experiences around how do we build an experience that you could bring someone to who's never been to church, and they could encounter the love of God in a way that they understood. And because of that, we've seen literally hundreds of people come to faith. And I meet people every week before this pandemic who were in church for the very first time. And so we've worked really hard for that. Through this crisis, though, I've realized that if you take that element away, the greatest mechanism for people to know the love of God is each and every one of us, the priesthood of all believers, that each of us actually have the responsibility. All of us have circles of influence, and your circle of influence will never be my circle of influence. And so we've shifted a little bit in our thinking around how do we equip and empower people to actually be who Jesus has called them to be in their communities, rather than relying on a building, a service once a week, a paid professional, a program to do it for you. How do you take the responsibility to be a follower of Jesus and to be making disciples? And if we're honest, and this is going to be the hardest, this might be a really hard question, but we all have to ask ourselves the question, when was the last time I actually made a disciple? That's a sobering question, because if that's the Great Commission, if that's the last thing Jesus says, okay, listen, okay, here, let's boil it down. Love God, love others. Okay, get that part right. If you don't get that part right, nothing else will make sense. And I think we got a long way to go in this, people. We got to learn to love people, regardless of their label, their brand, their leaning politically, their lifestyle. We got to learn to love people. But then the second thing is make disciples. So when was the last time you even had a spiritual conversation with somebody? You say, well, that's not my job. Actually, I'm sorry. Yes, it is. Well, that's Pastor Trevor's job, Pastor Bill's job. Nope, sorry, it is not. Our job is to equip you to do that. And so I've realized I need to do a better job as a leader to equip people and challenge them. Listen, who's in your life and who's God placed there for what reason? And what are you doing about it? That, to me, is the essence of what I'm learning through this whole process.
Yeah. Yeah, and we do live in a very interesting day in Canada, and you just touched on that. Like how do you think like Canada is viewing the church right now? And I know you were saying that we're known for what we're against or whatever. I thought about this a lot, actually, and I want to be known for what God is for. And so I've been working on that, but I realized that a lot of Canada doesn't care what we're for. They only care what, I don't even want to use the word against, what we may disagree with. So how is Canada viewing the church? How is it happening in your community? And that kind of like in context of, Canadian culture, how do we encourage people towards Jesus?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, okay. So we talk a lot about COVID-19 right now, but there's a far deeper pandemic. And COVID-19 is just the physical manifestation of a deep emotional and spiritual sickness. And the deep emotional and spiritual sickness is division. And we see this actually being amplified right now. So in every conversation, you are being forced to take a side. There's no reasonable, rational conversation anymore. It's you're either right wing or left wing. And if you're right wing, you hate left wing. And if you're left wing, you hate right wing. You've never actually had a meaningful conversation. You just know you hate them, or on lifestyle choices, or on race. And so what's happened is this physical pandemic has actually elevated the spiritual sickness in our culture. And the spiritual sickness in our culture is that it's all about me and my tribe. And I'm against anyone who's against my tribe. And the only antidote, I know we're waiting for a vaccine for COVID-19. Jesus actually already injected the vaccine for this virus into our spirit.
Yeah.
And it was this idea that you love everybody regardless, even if you're their enemy. And so the only hope for our world is to understand that and to start loving. And the problem is that Christianity in North America has become identified as a right-wing political movement. And we're not a political movement at all. We're not right-wing, left-wing. Jesus is very clear. This is not about politics. And it's not about, holiness is not about my tribe of people who believe these certain things. No, holiness is letting God do such a deep work in you that you learn to actually love people and live the way you were designed to live. So identity politics, which is huge right now, is actually the cancer. It is the problem. And the only cure is going to be if we as followers of Jesus take the mandate to love people seriously. And so that, I'm not just talking out of ignorance here. I'm talking about the fact that I have about half of my friends don't go to church, would not say they're followers of Jesus. And when I talk to them, their response to, when they find out I'm a Christian, first of all, they're shocked because I'm kind of normal, and I don't preach at them. And they're shocked at that, and that I actually care about them enough to listen more than I speak and to understand where they're coming from. But I've actually boiled down they say, so what do you actually believe? And here's what I believe. I boiled it down to 3 statements. You were created in the image of God. And because of that, you have incredible value. And everyone goes, and you were created to make the world a better place. And every friend I talk to, Christian, non-Christian, goes, oh yeah, okay, I can kind of buy that. And the second thing I say is that love is the only answer for this world. And they go, yes, okay. Then the only difference between me and maybe the rest of the world is that I just believe Jesus is the best example of what that could actually look like. And so I follow him. So again, the convicting question for me as a person is, do I actually love the way Jesus did in my community? Like, do you really think that Jesus would spout hate on social media? Do you really think that Jesus would take a political side? Do you really think that Jesus would fight for his rights? Sorry, the cross, he laid down his rights. Why? Because that's what love does. So the very things that Jesus came to model, we've actually forgotten. And the greatest tragedy is that we actually model the opposite in the name of Jesus.
Right.
And so this is the dysfunction. So people, when they think of Jesus, they think of someone who's exclusive, holier than thou, demanding, judgmental, restrictive, hate-filled. That's not Jesus. So I'm sorry, you don't get to put the fish on your bumper. You don't get to put Bible verses on your mirror if you don't reflect love, because the Bible is very clear. If you don't love, you actually don't know God. I don't care if you go to church. I don't care if you read your Bible every day. I don't know if you can quote scriptures backwards and forwards. If you do not have love, you don't know God. By definition, it's called a Pharisee. And we hate that because it sounds so harsh. Bill, you're being too harsh. No, I'm just telling you the truth. This is what the Bible says, and this is what we need to root out so that we can love the world again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's good. And so I'm like you, I'm trying to change the way the community and the country looks at us. We want to be the difference makers, right? We want to show what the love of Jesus really looks like. So one of the reasons why this conversation was coming up is because our church has been during this time reevaluating, and we want to reimagine what our church can look like. Now,
Mm-hmm.
You've been doing this for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I have been thinking about this, but not like, we trying our best to do little things, but now we have an opportunity to do a reset, and we're looking forward to that. Can you tell me, what kind of a little bit of the story is central and how you started feeling this way, and what you've been doing in that? That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, so I'll talk philosophically first and then really practically. So first of all, I think very early in my life, so I grew up missionary's kid, pastor's kid. I've been in the church my whole life. It's all I know. But I think I realized very early in life that the church never was meant to be a building. And it was never meant to be a job for paid professionals. That actually there was something deeper. And so I see this season as an opportunity, not an obstacle. And so you and I talked a little bit about what I've been learning through the book of Acts. So as soon as this happened, I said, okay, I'm going to just dig back into the book of Acts and what the early church was really like. Because I've heard lots of theories of what they were like. I wanted to just, again, for myself, evaluate. And here's what I learned, that it was a dramatic transformation from a Jewish sect. It's basically, they still observed all the Jewish observances, and they just added Jesus, to a Gentile church. And that was a major shift. And we've lost that. We've lost the reality that it's going to take something pretty dramatic to change and reach Canada again. And if we just keep believing that it's going to change if we do better worship and preaching, you're misguided. I'm sorry. We're like the emperor with no clothes. We need a little child to say, hey, it's not working. It's not working. At what point, when only 7% of Canadians would say they are followers of Jesus, do we say, man, that's not good enough? So I started reading Acts again. And again, in Acts 1:8, Jesus says, you're going to receive power. And the reason for that power isn't so that you can start a denomination. The reason for that power isn't so you can have a cool experience on a Sunday morning. The reason you're going to experience that power is that you can be my witnesses. Everything we've talked up to this point about, in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Well, they got the Jerusalem part because that's what they knew. They knew Jerusalem. There was the temple, so they met in the temple. They were doing all the things that they did before. They just added Jesus to it. And they're really actually quite comfortable. So we get to Acts chapter 8, and they're still in Jerusalem. They haven't gotten past Jerusalem. So a crisis happens. Stephen is stoned, and the church begins to be persecuted. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there who think, oh, the government's persecuting the church right now. Actually, no, they don't even know we really exist. To be honest, I'm sorry. I don't mean to be offensive, but that's the truth. So it takes a crisis for them to get out of Jerusalem. So Stephen is stoned, and it says the church was scattered. And what did they do? They preached the word of God everywhere they went. So now they're actually doing what they're supposed to do. And here's what I've learned. Sometimes it takes a crisis to get a wake-up call to actually do what you're called to do. And if I were to speak, and I speak this way to my own church family, this is our wake-up call. This is God saying, look, it wasn't working. You need to do something. So they go. Now, of course, everyone goes, oh, yeah, well, that's great. We're going to do that. Well, no, there was a major challenge. And I love Acts chapter 10 because, okay, so now they're scattered, but they still haven't really started reaching the Gentile church. So in Acts chapter 10, God shows Peter a vision, and God asks Peter to do something that in our mind is unthinkable. Like, I just want you to put yourself in his position for a second. God shows up and tells him to break God's commands. Wow. Like God shows up and says, okay, what I told you back there no longer applies. Like, okay, so think of every law you think as a follower of Jesus you're supposed to follow. Okay? And imagine if God came to you and said, yeah, those rules don't apply anymore. You do what Peter did. He said, no, there's no chance. And God says to him, don't you dare call what I call holy unholy. You don't get to make the decision here. I'm doing something. And if you're going to reach the Gentile church, you have to dramatically change. And if it means you have to eat pork now, you eat pork. I love bacon. If it means you have to go into a Gentile's house that's considered unclean, you have to do that. So Peter goes, okay, and it's the birth of the Gentile church. Most of us are not even here if Peter doesn't break God's previous laws. And here's what I've learned. Rule without reason is tyranny. If you don't know the reason for your rule, you become a tyrant. And for a lot of us, we have lots of rules. We just don't even know why. We've lost the why. So we become tyrants. And we call it holiness, but really it's just exclusivity. It's just, I'm not going to ever reach outside of my bubble because this is what I know. And if you want to get into this bubble, you have to become like me. And fortunately, God doesn't think that way, because if God had said that to us, you have to become like me in order to be saved, we'd be doomed. He became like us to save us. That's a radical idea. And we've lost that radical idea because we're not willing to do whatever it takes to reach lost people.
Right.
So you think, okay, that's great. Peter does it. Awesome. He's good. He's on his way. Well, then we hit Acts 15. Acts 15, Paul comes along, and now the new crisis is circumcision. And it's funny, Peter, just 5 chapters later, already forgets everything he's learned because he's like, no, you must be circumcised, which if you're a full-grown man is a very difficult task to accomplish. So he's
awkward.
And so Paul and Peter actually have a fight. Here's what I realized. We are going to have a fight. There's going to be tension. That's okay, because that's in that dynamic tension of iron sharpening iron, we become better. And so then Paul has to rebuke Peter, the very guy who Jesus said, I will build my church on you.
Right.
And Paul says to him, no, we believe it is through the grace of our Lord Jesus we're saved. Nothing you do. Nothing you do. You don't. It's not showing up to a building. It's not saying a prayer. I'm sorry if I'm ruffling feathers. It's not doing certain things with your life. It's believing by grace that you are saved. And so I'm just asking myself the question, what do we need to stop doing that is no longer having a meaningful impact? What do we need to stop doing because it no longer is making a meaningful impact? And what do we need to start doing? Right. And if that means we have to change everything, and this is where I get really radical. And so this could be just radical Bill out here in Ontario. We're all crazy out here. It could be, am I willing to do whatever it takes to reach people with the love of Christ? If I'm not, then I'm not in a right position. And if it means I have to change everything I do, am I willing to do it? This is the question that God asks the early church over and over and over again. And so you read through Corinthians and Romans, they have all these fights about meat sacrificed to idols and all this stuff, because we as human beings keep getting sucked back into the rules. My friends, it's not about your rules. Hey, have your rules. Let them be a personal conviction, but don't make them a corporate expectation. Right. Let the love of God be the only thing that we corporately unite around. And let's let those other, because those other things are actually holding us back from reaching people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So tell us about what's going on at Central.
Yeah, so practically it's kind of funny. So we started a journey about 10 years ago, and I knew that we had to change. So we started a building project. And the building project was to build a space that was for community first, not church first, which was very difficult for people, because it's like followers of Jesus go, well, I'm going to give you this money, so it better be something comfortable for me. So the first question is like, well, what's my seat going to feel like? And what's my sight line going to be? And on Sundays, what's going to feel like? Instead of, no, how can we leverage our resources to reach people? So we asked our whole community. We have a couple mayors in different municipalities around, and we said, what do you really need? And what they said is, we need things for kids. We don't have enough gym space. We don't have enough daycares. We don't have enough community space for kids after school programming. Okay. And so we said, okay, what if we built a building that actually addressed the needs of our community? So that's what we did. So we built a space, and there's not a single space in that building that is single use. It's kind of funny because, our auditorium that we're going to use on Sunday is actually a state-of-the-art gymnasium. And people are like, what? Only church planters start in gyms. I'm like, well, not this church, because if that's how we're going to reach our community, that's how we're going to reach our community. And then, of course, that philosophy started infiltrating itself into everything we were doing. Like, if we're not having an impact in the community, why are we doing it? Like, you can have all the worship experiences in the universe, but here's the good news. For those of you who love that, you're going to get to do that in heaven 24/7. Right. Like, so yeah, okay. On this side of eternity, we have one job. We have one job. The only reason Jesus hasn't come back yet is because we have one job: to reach one other person. God is patient, and that person might be your next door neighbor. That person might be your coworker. That person might be someone in your own family. And he is asking you and I to take that responsibility very seriously. Yeah. So we've tried to go, how can we best reach as many people as possible and equip them? And so for us right now, again, I don't know how this is all going to work out. It's kind of like I use the example of Columbus. It's like, imagine if someone said to Columbus, okay, so at what longitude are you actually going to cross over the horizon? Yeah. And he's like, I don't know, because I actually think the earth is round. I'm just going to start sailing. Mm-hmm. So we just have to start sailing. And for a lot of people, they're like, well, I need to know everything before I move. No, right. If you read the Bible, God said, go. Abraham, take the first step. Even though he didn't know, you need to read Hebrews chapter 11 again. Even though he didn't know where he was going, he did it. Even though they didn't see, some of them didn't even see the end. They just said, no, if this is the prime objective, This
Right.
is where I'll spend my life. So we as a church have just decided, how can we reach people? And if that means we have to be the black sheep of the denomination, we have to be the bad guys, that we're okay with that, because we just love people too much to let religion stop us.
Yeah, and I think it, it's a faith journey.
100%.
It's always going to be a faith journey. So, obviously, I know you're being facetious with the black sheep, but it's being courageous.
Mm.
It's being person who said, well, God's calling me and leading me by his spirit to do that. I have a heart for other people, right? Like I remember you saying in the past, like when you preach, you always think of your unsaved friend in that seat,
Mhm.
listening. And I think like now you're talking about our building, our location, our emphasis has unsaved people in mind. In fact, they're the biggest people that we're thinking about. And so how do you go from a church that's focused on themselves, and I would say most churches are, we go and we want to be impacted. I sometimes say entertained. We've created a lot of consumers, to a community that's reaching out, being a community center. That's a big shift. And I think it has to happen for every single church, not just Central, not just Life,
Mm-hmm.
but so that must have been quite a journey.
Yeah, well, you think about it this way. How did you learn anything? So there was two ways. You had someone instructing you, this is how you do it. And more powerfully, you had someone model it. So when you're growing up as a kid, you're watching your parents. How did they do that? And why did they do that? And that's how you're forming your opinion. And so unless someone's modeling it, unless someone's willing to courageously model it and teach it, you can't force people to change. People just don't, no one likes change. So let's just get over that. Okay. Let's all agree. Nobody likes change. Nobody. But change is necessary for growth to take place. And actually, if you want growth and change, friction is going to be an inevitable consequence. You cannot grow without friction. You can't. You can't change. Like if you want to lose weight, there's friction. You want to be better in your relationships, you got to have honest conversation. That's going to cause friction. It's the same in this concept. So I think the truth is that there's been a fundamental shift in our culture, and we just have to acknowledge that. And so I use the analogy of the shift throughout history. So here's another just a sidebar, and do with it what you want. But I studied history and these great breakthroughs in faith movements in the church and what happened. And so the first great breakthrough was Abraham, and his idea was one God. Well, was that just kind of did that happen in isolation, or was something happening in the culture that supported that? And I would argue that he came onto the scene during the Bronze Age. And that's important because people for the first time were starting to live together. And for the first time, they went from all these different tribal ideas and thoughts to a unified thought. And Abraham realized that and said, hey, there is one God for all people. That was a radical idea. And then, of course, you have Jesus coming into the world. And it wasn't arbitrary or random. He came during the peak of the Roman Empire, where they had Roman roads. And of course, that new technological breakthrough meant that the disciples could travel quickly throughout the world with the good news. Then the Reformation that we all love so much came as a result of the printing press. There was a technological breakthrough that fundamentally changed the church. Well, I would argue that we are in a fundamental shift right now. And the fundamental shift is technology. And actually, what we're doing right now is proof of that. We no longer are restricted by time and space. There's not a single human being any longer who allows time and space, well, the younger generation, I should say, to dictate their choices. Like you don't have a TV guide, and at 7:00 on Thursday night, you watch your show. You watch your show when you want, however you want. And so for me, this has 4 really powerful applications for the church. The first is we get to reclaim our homes as the spiritual center, which was the way it was always supposed to be. Go back to Deuteronomy chapter 6, that the church building was never supposed to be the spiritual center. It was the gathering. That's what ecclesia means. It was the gathering of those to encourage and inspire, but it was always supposed to be our own hearts and homes that was the spiritual center. We need to reclaim that. Second, we can leverage technology for greater impact and reach. Like I'll give you an example. I was golfing the other day, and as I'm golfing, the beverage girl is coming around, and she says, "I know you somehow." And I'm like, okay, so I get this a lot. So I'm like, okay, well, yeah, we went through and she's, oh yeah, you're the guy online. I've been watching for the last 3 weeks. A friend invited me to watch, and I've been watching you. So now every week when I see her, I'm like, hey, how you doing? She's like, oh, last week was so great. Because I would have never had that opportunity if we weren't leveraging technology to get into the hearts and homes of so many people around the world. And then I think we also need to create meaningful connection points with God and with each other. I think the shift that's going to happen in the church is, how do we get connected together? When we actually are together, how do we not just sit and observe, but how do we get connected? And then I think the final one is that we can actually speak a new language. And this is what you were talking about. It's, how do I speak in a way that my friends will understand? Because I mean, I love phrases like the blood of the lamb, but I'm sorry, if you didn't grow up in church, you have no idea what that means.
Right.
Now, in the ancient world, they did, because everyone sacrificed animals. So you say the blood of the lamb, they connect to it, but they don't connect to it anymore. I remember one of our experiences, someone came up after a Christmas experience and said to me, Bill, I get it. The Jesus of Christmas and the Jesus of Easter, that's the same guy.
Right.
Right? And I'm like, yes. But we are now in a culture that is biblically illiterate. So I'm sorry, I love the Bible as much as you do, but to say the Bible says means nothing to them anymore.
Right.
You say, well, it should. Well, okay, whether it should or shouldn't, it's like Jews telling Gentiles, you should know eating pork is bad. Like, what are you talking about? I've eaten pork all my life. So we've got to change. And we expect culture to change for us.
Right.
That's not how incarnation works. That's not how incarnational living works. That's not how love works. Love changes for the sake of another. Love is unconditional, no strings attached. And until we get that part right, the narrative is always going to be, the church is actually against me. That's what we have to change.
Yeah, and I've heard you say this, is that we are in a season of opportunity. It's not just an obstacle. And I'm hearing that coming out loud and clear today. I want to go into the digital, but I actually want to go into, you had talked about some things that we need to reclaim. Mm-hmm. And could you just touch on that and explain what those things mean?
Yeah, so my number one wake up call, I won't use the word term woke, because I know that's very inflammatory. I've woken up to the reality that we, as followers of Jesus, need to reclaim our hearts and our homes as a spiritual center.
Yeah.
We've got to stop relying on programming and pastors to feed us. That yes, they can equip us, but we must take the responsibility to own our own hearts and our own homes. It's not the job of the youth pastor. They have a part to play. They partner with you, but it is my job as a parent to raise my children in the ways of God. And so we're going, how do we do a better job by maybe going smaller and maybe going underground and equipping people to just leverage their circles of influence for Jesus, and say, hey, maybe it's watch parties, maybe it's just being intentional in relationship. Like, the other challenge we have is we're so busy going to church that we don't, and we have no other time for anything else. Well, that's not the way it was supposed to be. You and I weren't designed to be slaves to church. We were designed to be slaves to Christ and to serve our communities. So if you don't even know your neighbors' names, that might be something that needs to change. Right. You say, well, I hate my neighbor. Well, that maybe needs to change too. Because there's a reason you live where you live. There's a reason you work where you work. There's a reason you go to school where you go. And so we need to reclaim that. And here's the thing. People say, they say, well, I'm not being fed. Can I help you with that, Kay? Because I've heard that in my own life with my teenage kids. What they mean by that is, because when they were teenagers, they're grown up and out of the house now, but when they were teenagers, they say, there's nothing to eat in this house. And I hear that on Sundays, I'm not being fed. Okay, here's what I do. I say, okay, let's go to the fridge. Let's go to the pantry. Let's go to the second pantry. We even have like a pantry under our stairs with food. The problem isn't that there is no food.
Right.
The problem is, one, they just don't want to get off their seat, I'll use that word, to get it, or two, they don't like what's in it. And so that's the same analogy that works for me when it comes to us as followers of Jesus. Listen, my dear friends, this computer, this thing I'm talking to and through right now, has an amazing capacity. I can listen literally to thousands of sermons if I want. If I want a worship experience, I can watch worship experiences from all over the world. We live in a day and age where there is more content than you know more and have access to more than any other human being. And that there is no excuse for you to say, I am starving spiritually.
Right.
If you're starving spiritually, it's because you don't understand how this works. And so for me, it's reclaiming your heart and your home as the spiritual center and taking responsibility for that. See, we live in a culture of blame and shame, and the church has picked this up, right? It's your fault that I'm not growing. It's your fault that I'm not experiencing that. It's your fault that my friends aren't saved. Excuse me, no. There's no blame and shame in following Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
It's only responsibility and opportunity. And so I'm trying to change that narrative, change the narrative, take it on yourself to be who God called you to be and to reach the people God's calling you to reach. That's what we need to change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that's really good. I mean, that might have ruffled a couple feathers, but that's good. We need some pushback. We need to think about these kind of things. And I appreciate your honesty on that.
Well, can I just speak to that part too? I think this is really important for everyone who's listening to this, to understand. I actually love you. I don't know you. Maybe I don't know your story. Maybe I don't know what you're going through, but I love you enough to know that there's more for you.
Yeah.
And just like my kids, when they were growing up, if I saw potential in them that wasn't being realized, a loving response was to call it out in them and say, look, you were created for more than what you're experiencing.
Right.
So walk in that. Because let me tell you something. When I walk in this, I am fired up. People go like, you're pretty passionate. You're pretty intense. Well, I'll tell you why. Because I see it every day. I see it in my friends, those who go to church and those who don't. Because it does matter. This matters. You matter. God has called you, not just Pastor Trevor and I, but you to be who God's called you to be. And so that's why I'm so direct.
Yeah, that's good. And I think passion creates something that's a change. It's like, can you imagine if we just I should go to this thing and, I mean, it's okay. I mean, it's only eternity.
But here's the reason. Here's why church has become boring for so many people. Church has become boring and irrelevant for so many people because it is boring and irrelevant. And the only people who are going to change that is us, like all of us. So even now, people are like, oh, I can't worship like I used to. I'm like, yes, you can. I in my living room, stand up, raise my hands, sing at the top of my lungs, close my eyes. I imagine a room full of people. The truth is, there's nothing stopping you from worshiping Jesus, loving Jesus, and loving people. There's nothing. I don't care what the government comes up with next. They could lock us all down. They could blow up every church. And it would not stop us from being the church, because the church is not a building. It's not a program. It is all of us loving Jesus and loving others. When we get that right, I actually believe we're going to see revival. Okay, I'm going to say something else, and you do with this what you want. We need to stop praying for revival and start living in revival.
Amen.
And what I mean by that is stop waiting it for happen and make it happen. And you say, well, I can't make it happen. That's the role of the Holy Spirit. Yes, and the Holy Spirit has empowered you. That's what he's trying to do. He's been trying to do that for a very long time. So yes, we move in the power of the Spirit, but you need to start acting in the role and responsibility that God has gifted, equipped, and called you to.
Yeah. Yeah, and I quote Stephen Furtick all the time on that, and he says, we aren't waiting for a move of God, we are a move of God.
Absolutely.
And that is a huge shift that needs to happen. It's like we're praying for something but not living it. So Bill, so obviously there's a movement, like some people are going to be listening to this and saying, yeah, well, we don't need to be a part of the church, we don't need to gather anymore. But that's not what you're saying. You're saying why does the church exist? What does the church do better than anyone else?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah. The whole irony is that love cannot exist in isolation.
Right.
So if love is the essential, okay, it has to happen in community. And it happens in community in a couple of ways. One, when we talk about the gathering, which is the Greek word ecclesia, where we get the word ecclesiology, which is the study of the church. It literally, church means the gathering. So when we do gather, it's an opportunity for us to learn what it means to truly love God and love each other. That's the point of our gathering. And then that is supposed to transform us in such a powerful way that literally we're so full that it just oozes out of us throughout the week. So my question is, if you find yourself not in a loving position toward anybody, then the question is, you're not tapped into this idea. And so we must gather. The truth is that this pandemic that has isolated us proves this even more. We must gather so that we can learn what it really looks like to love, even when someone has a different theological position than me. So in our church family, we have some people who believe in a 6 literal day creation, and we have people who think it's a metaphor. Does that mean we're going to divide the church and start 2 denominations? Actually, no, that's the antithesis of what Jesus came to do. Jesus did not come to start multiple denominations. He came to build his church, one church. John 17, his one prayer, that they would be one like we are one. So we need to understand that. And the only way that you get to exercise that is if you put yourself in a group of people who are actually different than you. Whether you believe in pre-trib, post-trib, mid-trib, pan-trib, whatever you believe, like really, do you love Jesus and do you love others? Then we're working for the same thing here. And so that's why we gather. We gather to work that stuff out in a loving way. And then hopefully we're so filled with that love by being together that it translates everywhere we go. That's the point of the gathering. We must gather. Hebrews 10:25, do not forsake the gathering for that very reason. That's where love is. It's the lab. It's the lab for love. The church is supposed to be the lab where we go, man, sometimes I think you're a complete jerk, but I'm going to choose to love you anyway.
Right.
I think that idea is completely wrong. What, you voted left and I voted right? No, that's okay. I'm going to choose to love you anyway.
Right.
And until that happens, what did Jesus say? The world will know you are my disciples by your love. Right. So if we can't even love each other, well, we're already done. So that's why we gather.
Mm-hmm. So you talked about like the 3 C's. I remember I listened to a podcast and talk about the 3 C's. Do you want to expand on that? Because so you wanted to talk about, like, you talked about content, connection, and care.
Yeah. So I get asked the question a lot right now. What do I think new disciple making communities will look like moving forward? Like what are going to be what's the skeleton of this thing? What's the makeup, the foundation that we're going to build this house on? Because here's the reality, right? If you come across a house and it's kind of falling apart, dilapidated, but the foundation is good, it's a good investment because you can knock that thing down and rebuild it. So what I see when I look at the church in Canada is I see a really great foundation. Some of the doors are hanging a little bit askew and some of it needs a new roof and needs a few, windows sealed up, but the foundation is good. So what is the foundation? And here's what I've come up to. I think as I read Acts chapter 2, verses 42 to 48, 47, I come up with these 3 C's that we need to get back to. And again, we can get distracted on how we do it, but if we don't know why we're doing it, again, it's going to become frustrating and useless. So the 3 C's are faith-building content. That is one thing that the church does that nobody else does. It says in verse 42 of Acts 2, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. Mm-hmm. There's nowhere else you're going to go on this planet that is going to be faith-building a content the way that the church does, because we believe in Jesus. And so we can leverage technology to do that. We can answer real questions that real people have. Like I'll be honest with you, okay? My friends who are not followers of Jesus are not asking me, so could you please prove to me the Trinity? They're not asking that question. So why would I preach on it? Now, I'm not saying it's irrelevant, because it's totally relevant. Love cannot exist in isolation. So the fact that God exists in plurality makes total sense. God is love. So I can answer that in 2 seconds. But we get hung up talking about things that don't really build faith. We need to answer questions like, how can I keep my marriage strong? How can I help my kids love me and love each other? How do I make it through a financial crisis? Those are things that the Bible actually addresses. And so we need faith-building content. And we can do that online. The second, we actually need meaningful connection. In verse 46, it says, every day they met together. And they broke bread. I think, if anything, this crisis that our world is going through has emphasized we need each other. We desperately need each other, that we are not good in isolation. I don't know how you've been responding in isolation, but I know that my mind goes to places it shouldn't go. I know that my attitude goes to places it shouldn't go. I get negative, critical. And then if I just get spoon-fed all the negative narrative the media is pushing out, I can get sucked into that. I need to be connected to other people who go, Bill, don't believe that. That's a lie. The world is God, God's got it. He's in control. I need that connection. And what I'm learning too is that when we do gather, connecting is more important than content. I'm going to say that again, because the biggest reality for me is that I realize that people came to church not because of my amazing preaching. I'd like to believe that I'm a decent communicator, but they were coming because they want to be connected to God and to each other.
Yeah.
We need to reclaim that. And then the final one for me is intentional care. In verse 44, it says they were all together and had everything in common. This again isn't a political movement. This is a intentional caring, that when we're actually connected to each other, where faith is being built, we actually take the responsibility to care for one another. And this isn't a program. Like, starting a feeding program isn't the solution. Funding some parachurch organization that's doing something good is not necessarily the solution. I'm not saying that those are bad. I'm just saying you and I have been called to be intentionally caring for those in our circle of influence. We have the responsibility of caring for our neighbor, caring for that coworker, caring for that kid at school that we go to school with, whatever that is. That's our responsibility. That's how love is expressed. So we experience love through faith-building content. We grow in it by being connected, and we express it by caring. That's the three. So how you do that? Hey, each context can figure that out.
Right.
But we cannot give up those three things. That's what makes us unique and different.
Yeah, and I think those are awesome things to think about. I think we need to really wrestle through that, and they're biblical, so we need to know that they work.
Well, Acts 2, the early church, those were the three things that they did really, really well. And it says, and at the very end of it, and the Lord added to their number daily. Like, I mean, we're talking like whenever those three things aren't in play, you're not going to see growth.
Right.
So when you only focus on one, all three have got to be working in synergy in order for this to happen.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time. This has been really good. I've been challenged by it and encouraged by it. When I kind of feel like I have two passions that are always running in my heart. One for the people of God, and one for who've not experienced God yet. And so I drive around in my city and I think about, and I look at people and say, man, I just want them to know God and know his grace and know his love and know who he is, not just know about him, not just think, oh, there's a God that exists out there somewhere. But I just so desperately want to share this treasure that I have within me. And I know that I want to see the church empowered to reach the community. It's not just my heart, it's the heartbeat of God, right? So, and I appreciate that about you. And in fact, when you were talking, I was thinking about that. I was thinking, I think I got a lot of that from Bill. I saw it modeled, and I just have this burden for the church and for the community. And so I'm excited about the days ahead. So thank you, Bill. You are such a blessing. Thank you for carving out time for us.
Well, and thank you for reaching out to me too.
What I love about this is the coolest part about the restrictions. I was like, I am going to be asking people that normally could not be here on a Sunday morning to come and join me. And this is part of the dream that I had. And I was like, man, I would always have loved for you to come and share with our church. But here we are, and you're able to do that. So thank you for investing into our church. And I know how much you always say I would love it out there, but I'm telling you, if you could meet our church, we have some of those incredible people you've ever met. And I'm just thankful that we can say that about every church everywhere in the world.
Yeah, I
But
believe
man,
you.
I just love our church. I'm so excited what God's doing here. And yeah, we just appreciate you so much. So thank you for investing your time into us.
Yeah, well, honestly, thanks. Thanks for letting me be me. And again, I don't think I have it all figured out. I'm just learning like you. And I want to see transformation and change. And so for those of you who are watching, I just want you to know that God loves you more than you could even imagine. And so my first encouragement would be to just really believe that no matter what you've done, no matter what you're going through, no matter what you're struggling with, there's a God who loves you anyway. And let his love change you. And then all I'm asking in response to that is just learn to love other people. Maybe get to know somebody, maybe reach out, talk to them, text them, whatever it is. Maybe it's that neighbor you've never met. Maybe just take a casserole, I don't know, over to their house and just say, hey, I've never met you and I'd like to get to know you. Actually take the opportunity to get to know somebody. And then when you do that, don't do it so that you can get them across some finish line. Get it just to love them for who they are, regardless of what the result is. And I promise you, you'll see change in your community. So I want to bless all of you with the truth that you were created in the image of God and you have incredible value and dignity. And God will always love you. There's nothing that can separate you from his love. And in response, I bless you with the truth that you have been called to your areas of influence, wherever they are, to love other people that way too. And when we do that, God's kingdom wins. And in case you're wondering, love always wins. I love you guys.
Thank you.